The wind hits you before you even open your eyes. It tears through the gap in the hide wall and drops the temperature of the air by 10 degrees in a single second. You curl tighter. Your breath is a small white cloud. Outside, the world has been frozen for longer than anyone alive can remember. This is not a metaphor. This is Tuesday. For roughly 100,000 years, your ancestors woke up to this. The last glacial maximum, the coldest and most extreme period of the last ice age, peaked around 20,000 years ago. At that point, ice sheets nearly 3 kilometers thick buried what is now Canada, Scandinavia, and Northern Europe. Sea levels were 120 meters lower than they are today. Entire ecosystems that no longer exist were the only thing standing between your ancestors and extinction. And they survived. Not just survived. They painted caves. They crafted tools precise enough to thread a needle. They raised children, told stories, and built social networks that stretched hundreds of kilometers. How? That question has driven archaeologists and paleoanthropologists, scientists who study ancient human behavior. Start with the cold itself. Your body is not built for the Ice Age. You know this. Stand outside in February without a coat and your fingers go numb in minutes. But your ancestors were not standing outside naked. By 50,000 years ago, and possibly earlier, they had solved the clothing problem so completely that the solution would still be used by Arctic peoples today. Bone needles recovered from sites in Siberia and China, some dating back 45,000 years, tell the whole story, not just wrapped hides, sewn, tailored, fitted garments, stitched layers designed to trap body heat, with gaps strategically placed to release moisture during exertion. Archaeologist Olga Soffer of the University of Illinois spent years analyzing ancient fiber impressions left in fired clay fragments at sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, one of the most extraordinary Ice Age sites ever excavated. She found clear evidence of woven textiles and twisted cordage as far back as 27,000 years ago. Your ancestors were not just wearing animal skins. They were making fabric. But clothing alone does not explain survival at -30. Shelter does. When you picture Ice Age humans, you may picture a cave. And caves mattered. They appear again and again in the archaeological record, from Chauvet Cave in southern France, with its stunning 36,000-year-old paintings, to the cave systems of the Dordogne Valley, which show clear signs of long-term occupation across tens of thousands of years. Caves offer natural insulation. Their temperature stays roughly constant year-round. A deep cave entrance, sealed with hides and packed with warm bodies, is a surprisingly effective refuge from a glacial winter. But your ancestors did not always have access to caves. The open steppe, the vast frozen grassland that covered much of Eurasia, offered almost none. And yet, people lived there too. At sites like Mezhyrich in Ukraine, archaeologists excavated something almost impossible: entire dwellings built from mammoth bones. Massive curved mammoth skulls were used as foundation anchors. Jawbones were stacked into walls. Tusks were arranged into arched doorways. These structures date to roughly 15,000 years ago, and they are not small or improvised. Some were large enough to shelter 10 or 15 people. They were covered with hides, floored with more hides, and heated with fire. They were built by people who understood engineering. That brings you to the second great survival tool: fire. Fire is something your lineage has controlled, in some form, for at least 400,000 years. The evidence at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa shows burned bone and plant ash going back that far. But Ice Age fire was more than warmth. It was food preparation. It was light. It was a social gathering point that structured every waking hour of the day. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner of the University of Utah conducted a landmark study published in 2014 comparing the conversations of the Jew/Hwansi people of Botswana during the day versus around the fire at night. During the day, 70% of conversation was about economic matters, food, resources, tasks. At night, around the fire, 80% shifted to storytelling, spiritual discussion, and social bonding. The fire was not just heat. It was the engine of human culture. Now consider food. The Ice Age landscape was not empty. It was full of animals, animals larger and more dangerous than anything alive today. Woolly mammoths, cave lions, giant cave bears, steppe bison, woolly rhinoceroses, and your ancestors hunted all of them. This is worth pausing on. A woolly mammoth could weigh up to 6 tons. It stood nearly 4 meters at the shoulder. It had tusks over 3 meters long and a thick mat of fur that protected it from cold that would kill a modern lion within hours. And yet archaeologists at sites like Krakow's Badzista in Poland have found evidence of large-scale mammoth hunting, not just scavenging from already dead animals, but coordinated kills, spear points embedded in bone, multiple carcasses processed in the same location. This required planning, communication, and cooperation on a scale that is genuinely breathtaking to consider. Your ancestors did not just wander out and stab a mammoth. They studied migration patterns. They identified choke points, valley passes, river crossings, cliff edges, where large animals were predictably vulnerable. They developed projectile technology sophisticated enough to drive a spear point through 2 inches of thick mammoth hide. Archaeologist Lawrence Strauss of the University of New Mexico has documented the seasonal hunting patterns of Upper Paleolithic peoples across the Basque Country and northern Spain. Hunters who tracked bison, horse, and red deer with a precision that suggests detailed mental maps of animal behavior built up over generations, and they shared what they killed. This may be the most underappreciated survival mechanism of all. No single person or even single family unit can reliably feed itself through an Ice Age winter alone. The caloric demands are enormous. Your body burns far more energy just maintaining core temperature in extreme cold before you even account for the physical labor of hunting and shelter maintenance. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups in cold climates, including work by anthropologist Kim Hill on ache hunter-gatherers in Paraguay and research by David Damas on Arctic peoples, consistently show that survival depends on a network of reciprocal food sharing that extends well beyond the immediate family. You feed your neighbor today because your neighbor will feed you in 3 weeks when your cash runs dry. This was not charity, it was insurance. The social networks of Ice Age humans were enormous by any measure. Excavations across Eurasia regularly find shells, teeth, and ochre, a red iron oxide mineral used as pigment, traded or carried hundreds of kilometers from their source, a piece of Baltic amber found at a site in southern France, a Mediterranean shell at a site deep in Central Europe. These are not accidents. They are evidence of maintained social relationships across vast distances, relationships that would be activated when a group hit a bad season, a failed hunt, or a bitter winter that depleted their stores. Your ancestors survived the Ice Age not because they were individually tougher than you. They survived because they were socially smarter. So let's reconstruct a single winter day. You wake before dawn inside a mammoth bone dwelling on the open Ukrainian steppe. The hide walls are thick. 5 other adults and several children sleep around you, their body heat adding to the warmth of banked coals in the central hearth. Someone stirs the fire before the cold deepens. You eat something from last night. Dried bison meat maybe, or a mash of ground seeds. Your clothing is already on. In this climate, you do not undress to sleep. By mid-morning, 2 of the men from your group have gone out to scout. They left before sunrise, wearing layered, tailored hide coats sewn so tightly the wind cannot find an entry point, with boots that are stuffed with dry grass for insulation, a technique still used by Siberian peoples today. They are looking for bison tracks that have been reported by a neighboring group who passed through 3 days ago. That group is 3 days' walk east. You know their names. You have traded with them. You are connected. The women and older children spend the daylight hours processing hides. This is not a small task. A single hide that will be used for clothing requires days of scraping, softening, and working to prevent it from stiffening into an unusable board. Without this work, you die. There is no separation between craft and survival. By late afternoon, the scouts return. They found tracks. Tomorrow, you hunt. That night, around the fire, someone tells a story. You do not know. You cannot know whether it is true or invented or somewhere in between. But it is about a mammoth, and it is about your grandfather, and it makes the children laugh, and that laughter fills the mammoth bone house and presses back against the cold outside. Here is the counterintuitive part of this story. For most of human history, life was not a desperate daily scramble against extinction. Anthropologist James Sussman, who spent years living with Kalahari Bushmen, one of the groups most closely studied as a window into how hunter-gatherers live, found that their average foraging day lasted about 4 to 5 hours. The Ice Age winter imposed real hardship. Caloric needs were higher, hunting was harder, distances were longer, but the fundamental principle held: your ancestors were not grinding themselves to exhaustion every single day. They were strategic. They rested when they could. They ate well when they could. They stored social credit the same way they stored dried meat. The suffering was real. The resilience was also real. And here is what this means for you. The part of your brain that responds to cold with a sudden focused clarity. The part that goes unnaturally calm in a crisis. The social instinct that makes you want, almost irrationally, to help a stranger in distress. The pleasure you feel around an open fire with people you trust. None of that is accidental. All of that was selected for. All of that is the living inheritance of 100,000 years of Ice Age survival. You did not come from comfortable people. You came from people who built houses out of mammoth bones, sewed needles from antler, traded shells across 500 kilometers, and told stories by firelight that made their children laugh while the glacier pressed in from the north. The wind still hits you before you even open your eyes, but now you know where that stillness inside you comes from.